Alright everybody, so to get started with the modding portion of kind of how to get things into the game, right? We need to set up a lot of our Unity projects and our coding projects the exact same way. So we've got the Unity portion set up, we're ready to bring in some assets. Please watch my old videos on how to do that. That process has not changed hardly at all. And by hardly at all, I mean it only changes based on, if you've had to go into the trees or whatever you're trying to duplicate and then mock things and set things up, whatever you want to do. So this is setting up your coding portion. I highly recommend you open up a window on the right hand side and then on the left hand side. So the old way was to download something called Cabbage Crow Assembly Publicizer. So I'll pull that up on the screen. This is Cabbage Crow Assembly Publicizer. You would go to releases and you would download that. You'd extract it and get a nice little zip file. Potentially have to compile it yourself. So github.com Cabbage Crow Assembly Publicizer. It's actually the first thing that pops up when you Google Assembly Publicizer. So what we need to do is go into Valheim Data, Managed. When you get the assembly publicizer extracted, I have mine in my Valheim modding folder, you're going to see an exe. This is the old way of doing it, but you can drag your assembly Valheim onto the exe and launch it. So as you can see on this side, it created that folder. It's the publicized assemblies folder. Assembly publicized DLL is what it created, and it warns you. It says, hey, make sure that your coding project has allow unsafe code enabled. Okay, so you can hit any key to exit and you can drag all the DLLs one by one on top of this exe here and it'll create it and drop it into this folder. There's actually a newer, faster, and better method. So I'm going to show you that newer, faster, better method. So something that we need to do is we need a valid reference to BepInEx, right? So on the Valheim Unity guide, it does say for you to go to the BepInEx Valheim latest, right? You're going to jump out here. We're going to let this load. And we're going to see BepInEx pack Valheim. We are on 5.4.19 version. So when you manually download this, you extract it, you're going to get a nice little folder. Mine is in my desktop, Valheim mods, BepInEx packs. You're going to get a zip file that looks just like this. Okay. Inside of that, you're going to have the Thunderstore related items, which is icon, manifest, and readme, which are required by Thunderstore. But you're going to get this little folder in here. You actually need the contents of that folder, not the folder itself. So all of this stuff here, you're actually going to copy that into your main Valheim folder. Okay, and that's usually Steam Apps Common Valheim. I have it already extracted, so extract it, get things set up, put it into its own little folder. And we're going to jump straight inside of the contents of BepInEx _ Valheim, and we have all these files. So we're going to Control C and Control V over here. Okay. So you can close that out. We have our WinHTTP, start server, etc. We have BepInEx and we have core. The two files that we're going to need is these. So they're all there. We have the plugins. Plugins is empty. I do recommend deleting this. What I meant to say is we need to make it empty. I don't think that we should have that at all. You don't really need it. It's not really helpful, but I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm going to show you what we need to do. There's actually another assembly publicizer that will automatically, if you're using Jotun, if you choose to use Jotun for your modding process, this will create all the mmHook assemblies for you. If you don't and you use it my way, which is without Jotun and actually, learning the code yourself and not using a library for it, so you have a little bit of a better understanding. So this right here is the BepInEx publicizer. Okay, you would download this and get the zip file. I have already downloaded it. I've got it in my downloads right here, BepInEx publicizer, and I'm going to extract it. That's all I'm going to do. Okay. So I'm going to right click. I have 7-zip, so I'm going to go here and I'm going to say extract to this particular folder. And we have it extracted. So now if we notice, we have BepInEx, plugins, publicizer with 2 DLLs. Okay. So really, if you're lazy, you can just leave it at the BepInEx level, open up this file here, or this folder here, sorry, this is the default game folder, Steam Apps Common Valheim. Okay, you can click the folder, hit Control-C, hit Control-V, and now if we go into BepInEx plugins, we'll see that the publicizer is in there. So what this does is you need to boot the game at least one time. Okay, so we're going to boot the game once. We're not going to boot it from R2Modman. We're not booting it from anywhere else other than the game folder itself. Okay, what this should do is in Valheim data managed, it should create all of our publicized assemblies for us. Okay, so what this does is, and this new way of doing it, is it does create the assemblies for us, but it also creates these hash files. What that means is if the game updates and the hash does not match, it'll actually republicize everything for you. Okay, so this is the only thing and the only time that you really need this in your plugins. I recommend keeping that zipped file somewhere in case you happen to wipe this folder out, which I tell you to do quite frequently in my tutorials. Reason being is to guarantee that everything is complete slate clean. You have nothing conflicting. All right. So if you're using Vortex, Vortex does install things inside of this particular folder. Sometimes in BepInEx plugins itself, it'll just force install things. I don't like Vortex specifically for that reason. It's very invasive to this folder. I know that we've copied a lot of things here, but we are less invasive because we know exactly what we're putting here. Vortex will just throw some files in here, and you'll start loading mods that you're not sure why you're loading them if you switch to a different mod manager or you just boot from this particular folder, because as you can see, it loaded up BepInEx for us, and it loaded everything that was in that plugins folder. So from the coding portion, we're done. We're pretty much set up as far as the assemblies go and what we need to reference. So now we have BepInEx publicizer. Keep this in mind. This is Elliot Tate, BepInEx Tools releases. It's Mr. Purple 64411. Download this, get the zip. I'll include all of these links later. I'm going to minimize that for now because I actually don't have that bookmarked. So if we were to set up a brand new project right now, we would need to reference everything that's in this folder. This is kind of our go-to. I recommend pinning this, so I'm going to pin this to quick access. That way we can always just come back. You know, you can go and click Valheim. I've got quite a few pins in here, but we can go and click Valheim. I have a clean install of Valheim as well. Just kind of back things up. If you need a clean install, you need a guaranteed clean install, just rename this folder from Valheim to Valheim Clean 2 like I have, or Clean, or whatever. And then just re-verify integrity of files, and it'll always create just a Valheim folder with the latest. Okay, so I'm going to close this out. I use Writer for a lot of my mods. I'm going to open this up, and we're going to start a new coding project, more or less. So we're going to say a new solution, and make sure it is a .NET Framework class library. Preferably the latest .NET Framework. You can use 4.6, which is what Valheim is on, or Valheim's coded in. You can choose to, I always select this. I like having my project in the solution, whatever. Name it as, I'm going to say example mod tutorial. Okay. And I'm going to say create. So when we publicize our assemblies, whether you're using Assembly Publicizer or you're using the new method that I have, which is a nice little plugin. Thanks to, shout out to Zarbaz actually for finding that, or House Master as you might know him in the Odin Plus Discord. He found that handy dandy little thing. I didn't know it existed previously, and it's super awesome. It publicizes everything for us. So what we can do now is we want to create an example plugin. There is BepInEx tutorials for that. You're going to find BepInEx creating a new plugin project. I searched BepInEx. I've been here before. So 5.4.16. It says that that's the latest. It is not. We're on 5.4.19. But it'll tell you exactly how to create a new project, what everything means. Okay, so keep note of this right here. It's docs.bepinEx.dev/articles, dev archives. I will be linking all of this in the video tutorials. So just know, follow these things. It gives you the basis. It lets you know what a project is and how to set one up that works. I have something fancy in Writer, which is the IDE that I'm using right here, that allows me to use things called live templates. So I'm going to code a project in about 5 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I can do an Azu harm, if I can spell, Azu harm. It's creating a Harmony patch very quickly. I can do Harmony Azu tran, which is a Harmony transpiler, etc. I can also do mod template, right, which is a full template for a Harmony mod. This is a live thing that allows me to configure it. This is what I set up for myself. So namespace, I want this to be example mod template, right? It's going to name everything for me. I'm going to hit tab. The author, of course, is me. I'm going to hit tab again, and look at that. I'm done. I've configured everything for me. It's got my mod name, mod version, author, all of this, setup watcher, blah, blah, blah. If you notice, there's a ton of errors. That's because we haven't set up any of our references. So that's where all of that stuff comes in from previous, is you're going to, hopefully you've pinned it to quick access, you're going to jump straight to your default install of Valheim. Okay? You're going to need to reference things that are BepInEx, and you're going to need to reference Unity things, and you're also going to need to reference your publicized assemblies. I've done this in a previous tutorial, but I'm going to do it one more time for you guys here. So BepInEx folder, core folder, you're going to reference BepInEx.dll and zeroharmony.dll and open those up. As you see, it's starting to resolve some things. So we're going to add from, we're going to go jump right back, jump out to the Valheim folder, unstripped core lib. The defaults that you're going to choose is, if you're bringing in a custom asset or you plan to, reference the asset bundle module. You also guaranteed always need to choose these two, but you need to choose core module and, of course, Unity engine.dll. Guaranteed have those. Okay. And then add reference, jump back out to the Valheim folder, Valheim data, managed, jump into your publicized assemblies. All right, so with this new tool, you're actually going to have some files that you need to not click on. It's going to give you everything. All right. What you need is the assembly Valheim publicize, assembly utils publicize, and assembly GUI utils publicize. All right, those are the three main ones that you need. If you want to do anything with Steam, etc., you'd reference those. Ignore the hash files. Okay, hash files are only for the hashing, hash checks for when the game updates. It's going to reference those and republicize. All right, so we're going to say open on all of that. So my modding template uses newer syntax. It uses newer C# stuff. So what I need to do is actually reference my stuff and say, I right-clicked on the CS proj, I went to properties. I need to up this. I tend to use C#10 now, and then nullable reference types I always enable. And then debug, you need to only allow unsafe code, and then allow unsafe code on release as well. That is what the assembly publicizer warned us about. You need to have this, otherwise you cannot reference the public assemblies correctly. Okay, you're going to get a ton of errors if you don't do it. All right, so I'm going to click OK. This resolves my new, which is a new method of doing things. So I use Blackson's ServerSync. What this allows me to do is any configuration that the BepInEx docs tells me, right? Let me see if I can find an example really fast. So using configuration files, right? You see how it says this config.bind? All she did was create a wrapper for it, and she allows the server to be basically the dictator of the configuration files. So her name is Blackson ServerSync. So Blackson boop, right here, Blackson boop ServerSync. We're going to go to releases. Okay. Always go to releases for a lot of these things. We have this DLL, but we want to download it straight into a folder called libs. It's the best way to do this. So right click on your CS proj, create a directory, call it libs, and right click once more and say show in Explorer. So we have this here, right? So go into your libs folder, click it, copy the path. Okay. Now go back to this. You're going to click the DLL. It's going to say, hey, where do you want to download this? Just click up here, paste in your thing. Delete the one if you happen to have already had a project open that had ServerSync. I'm going to download that and say save. So anytime she releases a new one, highly recommend you update. Okay. She's got a lot of creature manager, item manager, etc. That are super simple. You just grab the class if you want to. She's got ServerSync. ServerSync is the best thing that you're going to have. So instead of doing this config.bind, you're still going to do the config entries like this. So whether it's a string, a boolean, etc. It's always going to be in the awake method, but instead of doing config.bind, we're actually going to do config instead. Okay, and I'm going to show you that here in a second. So, as we have here, we see that I'm referencing config sync. I've got my new mod GUID, mod version, etc. Feel free to use one of my templates. If you want, you'll get pretty much a template almost exactly set up just like this. And sync config entry. So this is what she has on a wrapper. I've added a few things in here that say whether it's sync with the server or not sync with server. She does not give an example on this. But we are now going to go in here, add reference, add from, and then since we still have it in our clipboard, hopefully, jump straight to the libs. Okay, make sure you reference ServerSync. And go in there and click Alt-Enter inside of Writer. It'll reference it for me, or just add using ServerSync to the top. All right. Now, ServerSync by itself needs a little bit more. Just a little bit more. All right, so we're going to right-click, and we're actually going to go to Manage NuGet Packages. It needs a thing called IL repack. So IL repack, and you need .lib.msbuild.task. We're going to add that to our project. Close this out. All right, so we have the package, but now there's something else that she says on ServerSync to use. So we're going to jump back to her repo. And she says, hey, make sure to create an ilrepack.targets file in your project folder and populate it with this contents. All this is doing is saying, hey, input method is where the target path is. Target path is what we've defined. Output path is going to always copy this. Okay, so I'm going to show you what it means. We're going to go into libs, right click, add existing item. Make sure that this is your project that you're currently in, and bring in ServerSync. Okay, and as you see in the references, it's already here. Inside of libs, we now have ServerSync DLL. You're going to right click, properties, change it from, not from content, and then say copy always, or copy if newer. All right, so we have all of our things set up. Now we need to create the file that she says. You need your IL repacks file. So right click, add, new file. We're going to call it IL repack.targets. Okay. And apparently I can't spell, so let's go to rename. IL repack.targets. Let me make sure I've got that spelled right. Yep. So ILR is all capital. Okay. Now paste in what she gave you. Okay. So what this is going to do is when you build it, it's going to merge ServerSync into your mod. All right. What that means is ServerSync is just something that a mod author uses. Okay. With my templates, you're going to get this config sync locked and pretty much everything set up for you. Okay. What this does is allow them to lock the server's configs. So on the server or using BepInEx configuration manager, etc., they can turn on and turn off their configurations, whether they want the server to actually force it. Only admins can do this. You can force this value to always be true and not even give them the option, however you want. Okay, so what we have here is if we want to create a new config using ServerSync, it's not anything different at all, other than changing from config.bind to config, right? So let's say I want this right here. I want this configuration, and as you can see, I'm going to have to copy this config entry bool up here. I have my project set up a little bit different in the fact that I put mine inside of a region called config options. So down here on this particular line, or on the new line right after, is where I would drop my config entry bool. Okay, but for now, I'm going to go into the awake method. I'm going to paste what we got from that tutorial, and then I'm going to copy and grab everything. Copy that config entry bool, right? And you're going to go down. If you're using my templates, you'll go down here. If not, as long as it's in the class, you're fine. Okay, just make sure it's there. And then we have the config display greeting. And if you notice, this isn't giving us errors anymore. But this still says config.bind. We don't want that. Just change it to config. Okay, that's it. That's the only difference between using a default configuration bind and ServerSync configuration bind. That wasn't necessarily part of this tutorial as far as setting up a coding project necessarily, but I do highly, highly, highly recommend that any mod you use for Valheim has ServerSync in it. If you're choosing to use Jotun or Jotun or Jotun, however you want to say it, that is a library that actually took Blackson's ServerSync code and pulled it in. So if you already are using Jotun, you don't need ServerSync. I do recommend not using Jotun only because it'll give you a little bit better understanding of your code and knowing why things break. And if you come into the Odin Plus Discord, there's going to be a lot more help for you simply because we know how the code works underneath and not necessarily how the library Jotun works. Okay, so that's really all you have to do to set up a project. You can actually hit Control F9 for Writer. I think it's Control Shift B for Visual Studio. Most of this process is the same. Hopefully you know how to use Visual Studio or Writer in my case. So we can build this. I'm going to hit Control F9, which is my shortcut. If you notice, it builds successfully and didn't have any errors. And we are good to go, really. If you want to do the asset bundle and bring in your asset bundle and use Piece Manager, etc., I'll quickly show you that because a lot of people will most likely want to use things that are easy for them. So what I have, and you get these by default from Blackson. Okay, so Item Manager is just a class. You can get it as a DLL. The DLL portion when you go into releases, right? This is going to be the exact same way that we brought in ServerSync, all right? But that, instead of IL repack.targets, you would copy this one line right here that says output ServerSync, and you'd say item manager.dll instead. You'd probably drop it in libs if you have libs set up, and then reference it just like we did. Everything that we did with ServerSync, you would do with the new ones as well. I have mod templates that would do the same thing. So mod templates are GitHub repositories that have all of this already referenced and all of this already set up for you. You can choose to use those. You can choose not to. I'm Azumat Dev, so I've got like Piece Manager right here is one of them. Piece Manager is only found on mine, but it's the same thing. You would grab the CS file or the DLL file on the right-hand side and be able to compile your project. So let's say I don't want to use the DLL. I want to be able to edit this code anytime it breaks. So I clicked on raw there. I went to the class, itemmanager.cs class, clicked on raw, opened it up, copied it. Now I would go into my project and I would say add new class, and I would call it itemmanager.cs or just item manager and click enter. Now it's going to automatically populate some things in here. Just Control A, Control V, and paste. Right? So in her projects, when you copy these in, if you're not using the DLL version, you're going to get this GUI layout error. What that means is you don't have a Unity reference set up quite right. So add reference, we're going to jump right back to our Valheim folder, okay, and go into unstrip core lib. She uses the IamGUI module, and click open, and it'll resolve all those references. How I know that that's what she's using is if you go to item manager here, you can pop this open and go into CSproj, the CSproj file, and scroll. So you can see that she's using assembly publicized DLL, assembly utils, etc., asset, Unity Engine Core, and then she has IamGUI, which is what I just referenced. So that's a good way, easy way to see some things. But also, while we're here, she has this awesome thing that will resolve the game folder, whether you're on Linux or Unix and or Windows. Okay, so you're going to go from this choose block to the choose block, which at least on the item manager is lines 37 through 53. So choose to choose, and if you notice, it comes after the property groups and before the item group. I don't know if that really matters too much, but I always keep that consistent. So I right click, show in Explorer. I'll close out my project to guarantee that I don't get any file permission errors or there's no weird stuff. I will right click and go into Edit Notepad++ for mine. And the choose property goes right here about line 37. Yep, property group and item group. I'm going to go here and delete the line. I'm going to paste in exactly what I just copied. So what this allows us to do is instead of having hard-coded paths to our game file, which is basically what this does for each of our DLLs, you see Zero Harmony DLL, Simply Publicized DLL, etc. It allows us to use this game path variable. So you can copy this as $ parentheses game path camel case and end parentheses. All right, so you're going to go from Valheim to the left, and you're going to go right before that greater than symbol. And I hit Control H in Notepad++ to replace. I already have it here. I use this quite frequently, but right here you can see exactly what I'm going to replace. I'm going to hit Replace All on my CS Proj and click Save. Okay, my mod template does all of this for you, so if you happen to want to use that as a starting basis, go for it. We'll say open this back in Writer. And our coding project is now 100% set up. It's ready for us to get started coding, bring in our own asset bundle, etc. Look at my other videos now that you know a little bit more knowledge on how to do this. Really look at those videos, figure out how to bring in your own assets. That process hasn't really changed. I don't want to reiterate over it. But this is a little bit more in-depth on how to set up a project, both with item manager, skill manager, etc. that all got Blackson. You can use my mod templates, which actually have those embedded already for you, set up for you. So you don't have to do everything that I just did, but just to show you how I set up those templates, that would be exactly how. You can keep your config values here, etc. I do tend to ramble, so without me rambling too much further, best of luck to you guys. Again, any questions, contact me in Discord. Thanks.